Friday the 13th. Hate, Kill, Repeat. Chapter 6. The scene was thick with cops and officials mostly getting in each other's way. Hordes of disappointed motorists goggled out of the windows at the gas station, either through morbid curiosity or simply a desperate need for fuel that wouldn't be met for the rest of the day. Catherine Banks, the gas station clerk, had once been beautiful, so it seemed to Daimler. The bullet hole that had replaced her left eye somewhat compromised that beauty. The other orbs stared upwards, lifeless but questioning, as if the poor girl's last thought had been crystallized by her retina. Why me? Mick Dunvey, who had joined them, and Van Stat for the ride from Rochester, was examining the single bullet that killed Banks. It had emerged from the back of her skull, hammered through a hanging calendar, and lodged itself in the wall. The caliber of the bullet suggests that these were our guys, the specialist told Daimler. It's the same as the one used for most of the other killings. They may be losing control of themselves, offered Van Stat, gazing dispassionately down at the corpse. It's common with spree killers. They start to think that they can't be caught, that they can do anything. The cooling down period between each kill starts to dwindle. Have we looked at the CCTV? Daimler yelled through to a local cop he'd met 10 minutes earlier. Sam, is there any footage? He pointed up to the small camera housed in one corner of the station's ceiling. Sam shook his head. Looks like they took the tape, sorry, sir. Daimler dug his heels into the ground and leaned back against a wall. His eyes strayed to the rows of bottles which adorned the nearby racks. He imagined their contents flowing out onto the ground, a glorious glugging noise coming from the necks. Oh, for a sea of alcoholic freedom. He could set sail and head off to sweet oblivion. No more killers, no more profiling, no more anything. Ed? Van Stat's voice snapped him out of his daydream. He turned to see her looking oddly caring, just for a second. Perhaps the Ice Maiden was finally beginning to thaw. He nodded to her, preoccupied again as his gaze lingered on the front desk. Hey, Sam, he said. What's the last thing that went through the cash register? Sam looked puzzled as though wondering why it mattered. I don't know. We haven't looked, should we? Daimler shrugged. Can't hurt. He turned back to Van Stat. I wouldn't be surprised if these people actually paid for their goods before blowing her eye out. If they see themselves as good folk, then surely they might want to pay their way, don't you think? Van Stat nodded slowly, chewing it over. She turned to stare out of the front window onto the forecourt, as though trying to conjure up a vision of the killers themselves. While they weren't exactly getting on famously, Daimler was coming to like the girl. She took the job seriously, a little too seriously, you might argue, but it was better than some green no-mark who thought the game was just like it was on TV, all hard-jawed heroics and cold beers after a long day's work. Oh, beer. Don't think about beer. Walk this way, Ed, said Sam. We found out what the last purchase was. The idea struck Daimler as he was midway through a marathon swig of scotch from the hip flask in his breast pocket. Disturbingly, the best idea often came at such times. In his other breast pocket he carried a handy travel-sized bottle of mouthwash. Emerging from one of the restroom's cubicles, he sluiced around some in his mouth and spat it into the bowl. Then he looked his own reflection in the eye. It was a strange feeling. While he had sufficient professional detachment to realize that he had become an alcoholic, he seemed unable to do anything about it. Wasn't even sure that he wanted to. The test would be his judgment calls. If he started making mistakes, he might reconsider his lifestyle, provided it wasn't too late. Please be right about this, you bastard, he murmured out loud. Van Stat followed him as he emerged from the gas station, clutching a large map. What is it, Ed? Let me in on this. Sure, just give me a chance, huh? He paused by the bonnet of police car, looking excited. I've got it, he said, one fist clenched. He beckoned her to stand next to him, and she did so, squinting against the afternoon sun. This map is the last thing they bought, said Daimler. As he spoke, he was unfolding the paper, spreading it awkwardly across the bonnet's hot, smooth metal. It's a map of Clearwater's. You don't know they bought it, said Van Stat, standing with her hands on her hips. Could have been anyone, just before Banks' murder. Daimler ignored her. Now, we've already established that they're heading in pretty much a straight line, he offered, tracing a rough path between the kill spots with the bony forefinger. But where are they going now? His finger circled the northeast. These people are driven by a sense of moral duty. If they aren't exactly religious, then they resemble religious folk in terms of their love of purity. And complete lack of tolerance for the impure, Van Stack completed, brushing a stray strand of hair back behind one of her ears. Daimler closed his eyes, striving to make an idea solidify in his mind. What if they want to find like-minded souls? Why would they? Broaden their flock, have their views reinforce strength in the face of adversity. So who would be a like-minded soul? You said yourself that these people are fairly unique in terms of established killing spree profiles. Daimler stabbed a finger down on the map, and Van Stack bent down to read the location. Clear waters. She looked at him blankly. Jason Voorhees, said Daimler. Crystal Lake's self-appointed guardian of morals. This guy, whether he actually exists or not, is supposed to be a twisted Puritan, killing promiscuous teens, drug takers, and people generally having a blast. Didn't you hear that radio report earlier? The local police are dragging the lake looking for him. I'm not familiar with the Voorhees story, shrugged his partner. That's because you deal in facts, smirked Daimler. Jason Voorhees passed into legend long ago. He's a cautionary tale to scare the kids, an alibi for every psycho in a mask. Although, when a spate of killings happened up here quite recently, he tapped the map again. The local force refused to accept it was him. Van Stack shook her head. I still don't understand the leap of faith you're making. Exactly, said Daimler. It is a leap of faith. Our unsubs are not using logic as we know it. They're delusional. They think they're doing the world a favor. Maybe even that they're divine messengers. And maybe, just maybe, his eyes returned to the map around his finger. They see Voorhees as a man after their own black hearts. Van Stack pulled a face. I don't know. I very much doubt Jason. What's his name? I doubt he really existed. I definitely doubt he's still alive, even if he ever was. So do I, said Daimler. But the only important thing is that they might think he's in Crystal Lake. So let's head up there. Take a risk. Frankly, Mel, can I call you that? I'm sick and tired of always being one step behind these fuckers. Tom was impressed. The Phoenix Heights Hotel looked luxurious. The BMW had turned off the main road and was now approaching it along a drive decorated at intervals by shaped hedges and stone ornaments. The building itself was massive, wider than the average big city hotel, yet stacked high. Tom quickly counted 13 floors. The stone architecture itself appeared ancient, like a British structure, but the fresh window frames betrayed signs of the renovation that Greg had mentioned. Greg sat silently behind him, arms folded, not even looking at the hotel. Inside the BMW, it had been frosty and subdued. Tom felt proud of himself for demoting Greg to the passenger seat. He had allowed himself to be forceful. April seemed highly impressed with this sudden display of traditional machismo, which was something of a shame as he was starting to tire of her. No doubt she'd like that, too. Wow, this place is nice, she said directly behind him. Look at that fountain. The fountain in question was the centerpiece of a circular driveway directly outside the hotel's reception entrance. It was the most ostentatious aspect of the hotel's grounds, around 15 feet across and almost 10 feet tall. Its dazzling main feature was a sizable bird, fashioned from white metal, which looked like steel but with a glossy, reflective finish. Its jagged wings were spread as if the creature was taking flight. "What bird's that?" April asked. To Tom's right, Greg made a tutting sound, gazing sullenly at the metallic creature. "Ah," said Tom, as kindly as he could. "It's a phoenix, April." "Oh," she said, "what's that mean?" "It's a mystical creature, the one that resurrects itself from the ashes." "Ah," she said. There was a pause as Tom swung the BMW past the fountain. Then April asked another question. "Why did they choose a phoenix, do you think?" Greg was unable to restrain himself any longer. "It's the name of the fucking hotel, you dumbass." His eyes threw daggers in April's general direction. "Turn your brain on, for Christ's sake." "Hey," said Tom as he pulled up in front of the hotel. A parking valet was making his way over to the vehicle, as was a bellboy hungry for bags and tips. "Greg, please lay off her." "Look at the big guy, standing up for his secret girlfriend," glowered Greg, undoing his safety belt with a clunk and opening his car door. I wonder how much longer she'll stay secret, though, huh? He slammed the door shut behind him, leaving Tom and April to exhale deeply. Tom realized he was shaking. Mr. Sheridan! The exaggerated roar came from Larry Bruckenheim, who was striding across the huge marble-floored reception area to the check-in desk where Tom, Greg, and April were waiting for their room keys. Tom abandoned the signing-in form which he had been completing and shook his boss's big, pudgy hand. The grip was as vice-like as ever. Larry was a big man, but not in terms of middle-aged spread. He was well built for a guy in his 50s, like a Marine sergeant. He was, however, doing his best to disguise the fact that he was rapidly going bald. He was corporate America personified, all slickly insincere charm and powerful body language. "How the hell are you, Tom?" asked Larry with his usual intensity. He turned to give April and Greg a perfunctory token. "Hi, guys." Without even looking at him, Tom could feel Greg's churning resentment at not being greeted by name. Larry probably didn't even know his or April's names. As Larry stood there slapping Tom's shoulders and amiably grilling him about the journey here, Greg and April sloped off to the elevators, room keys dangling from their hands. Larry didn't even see them go. Tom noticed April purposefully, entering a different elevator to Greg. Good girl. "Oh yeah, that's it, baby, that's it." Shelley heard Clayton Hines' words only dimly. She was more concerned with maintaining her grip on the sides of his desk as they rutted. Sweat covered her forehead, bare breast and back. She was wearing only her short skirt and pantyhose, the latter bunched up around her calves. She felt herself rising toward a grand climax, the kind she had enjoyed many times in the early stages of their affair, 3 months ago. These days, Clayton seemed less considerate, but maybe this time things would be different. "Oh, yes!" cried Hines, his face red and contorted. Shelley thumped the desk in frustration as she fell short once again. Hines sat on the floor, breathing deeply. His buzzer sounded again, for maybe the third time in the last 20 minutes. Shelley had lost count. Once again, Hines ignored it as he attempted to regain his strength. Before we got into that," said Hines, the red patches on his face slowly fading, "I was going to tell you something. I'm sorry that it has to be now, but it's very important." Shelley stopped still, a sense of dread drawing on her face. While she was staring directly at him, he seemed unable or unwilling to make eye contact. "I am afraid that we can continue this no more," he finally said, his transatlantic accent varying from American to German and back again, in the space of the same sentence. "It's not the most professional thing for us to be doing." Shelley felt her cheeks flush and her hackles rise. Here she was, half naked on his desk and about to be thrown aside like a fast food wrapper. "That never seemed to bother you before," she said, feeling infuriated. Still avoiding eye contact, Hines spread his hands wide in defense. "I was weak. You are a very beautiful woman, but this is wrong." "Yeah, right. More likely you've got a new girl on the go. Who is it, Clay? I'll bet it's Marissa, isn't it? Marissa from the breakfast shift. Giving you something to munch on in the mornings, is she?" She hopped off the desk and stooped down to find her blouse, suddenly feeling disgusted with herself. Just minutes ago, she had felt like a girl having a glamorous, illicit relationship with her boss. Now she was too old, cast aside in favor of a younger model. Was it her belly? God knew she tried to tighten it up, but once you got past 30, it was more of an uphill struggle. She wished she had exercised more during her 20s. Perhaps if she hadn't been forced to look after her younger sister for all those years, she might have had more time. She stopped searching for excuses and turned her attention to the slimy toad that was standing before her, clearly dying for her to leave. "Fine," she said. "I'll give you exactly what you want. I'm quitting as receptionist." Hines was wringing his hands together. Something on the ceiling had captured his attention and wouldn't relinquish it. He nodded insincerely. "I understand." "I'm sure you do," she said, feeling sick as she realized that she was probably number 58 in a long line of receptionists that he'd used and abused. Why did she fall for such a bastard? Story of her life. "Before I go, though, I'm going to go to the bar, get drunk, and fuck a guest or two." Hines exhaled like a prude at this, yet he didn't look too worried. "Go ahead," he said quietly. "Tell Chloe to put the drinks on my account." Was that it? His idea of making it all up to her? "You bastard!" she yelled, shocking herself by taking a swing at him. He grabbed her wrist and they stared fiercely into each other's eyes. For a terrible second, she thought their rage was about to dissolve back into passion. But he released her and stood looking out of the window, straightening his clothes as she did the same. Then she was out of the door, blazing inside. She would never let this happen again. From now on, she would do the fucking. The pickup truck, which used to be blue, rose and fell jerkily as it negotiated the uneven soil. At the end of this narrow drive was a modest farmhouse, which looked as though it had seen better days. The roof was in a state of disrepair, and it had clearly been years since the entire property had seen a paintbrush. It sat in the middle of green fields, but the only livestock on display were a few disheveled pigs in a compact pen. Crops, too, looked as though they wouldn't be yielding much, even allowing for the blazing heat which had cooked the area that summer. Farmer Jack Flanahan opened his car door, eyes fixed on the farmhouse. He planted one boot on the ground, territory that had been his for the last 23 years. Memories good and bad flashed through his mind. The moment when he and Dolores realized that they could sustain themselves as a business. The children being born and the heart-wrenching moments when they both flew the coop to attend college. The autumn when the storms hit and devastated much of the place. The last time he and Dolores had just pulled it all back together and started from scratch. It all had to end. Everything always did. The farmer leaned back into the truck and grasped his shotgun, tugging it out of the seat and the vehicle. He had parked further from the farmhouse than usual, and for very good reason. There were lights on inside the house, this despite Dolores having told him that she would be shopping in town this afternoon. He had known that she was lying. Truth be told, he had known this for the best part of the year. Only difference was that this time he was prepared to do something about it. He was tired of living and tired of being mistaken for a fool. As his father once said, "Make fun of a Flanahan, and you'll pay the price, sooner or later." A gathering wind whipped leaves up around him. Flanahan hefted the shotgun's long barrels up on his left palm, comfortable as ever with the balance of its weight. This weapon had been with him so long, it was practically an extension of his arm. He had carried it through every season, wasting various breeds of unwelcome critter. One night in the early 80s, he had almost killed a human, an intruder who was wandering around his property in the night. The rain had hammered on the windows as Flanahan crept through the house, shotgun in his hands. When he reached the porch, he'd received the fright of his life as a grizzled stranger loomed out of the darkness, rain dripping from his hat. Flanahan had leveled the weapon at this grinning old loon. Making his way down the driveway, Flanahan remembered how close to killing the intruder he had been, how his finger had gripped the trigger but managed to sufficiently restrain itself from pulling it all the way. The figure had babbled some paranoid garbage about how only he knew what was going on by the lake, before Flanahan told him in no uncertain terms to get the fuck out of there. He later discovered, through conversations with neighbors and local cops, that the guy was a pest who was being watched by the law. What was his name again? Flanahan wondered. The farmhouse drew closer. Ralph? Mad Ralph? Crazy Ralph? Either way, the guy had finally gotten himself murdered, only months after his appearance at the farmhouse. Flanahan had figured that the area was a whole bunch better off. He cocked both sides of the shotgun and began to walk faster, ignoring the wind's mournful blow. The hotel's kitchen was big. Its staff worked hard, carrying large pans around, performing a kind of impromptu ballet as they avoided bumping into each other. "Awesome," said Tom. "I feel like I'm standing in The Shining." Larry laughed and slapped his pet employee on the back, a little too roughly as usual. One day, Tom thought he'd just fall flat on his face as a result of Larry's overly enthusiastic backslapping. "Haven't seen that movie," added Larry, making it clear that he didn't understand Tom's comparison in the least. Beside him stood Clayton Hines, his hands rubbing together in a show of greasy subservience. He had homed in on Larry the moment he saw him standing at the check-in desk with Tom, and scurried over, introducing himself in a nauseating display of fake charm. Obviously, Tom had thought, Hines knew that it was well worth massaging the bloated egos of the larger cogs amidst America's corporate infrastructure. Metaphorically jerk them off during their stay, and they'd be sure to come back for second and third helpings. This was the first stop off on the tour of the place that Hines had offered, no, insisted on, giving them. The kitchens were situated on the ground floor at the back. Windows looked out over the grounds behind the hotel, which appeared to play host to golf tournaments. "We never fall short when it comes to customer satisfaction," said Hines. "As you can see, We employ so many staff that we never have a situation where we can't fulfill orders from the hotel's 3 restaurants. I'd rather have chefs sitting around doing nothing than have a problem with the flow of dishes out of here." "Very commendable, Mr. Hines," said Larry, nodding. "Please call me Clayton." "Okay, Clayton. I'm sure looking forward to trying a nice steak this evening." If Hines noticed the mispronunciation of his name, then his professional sheen didn't betray the fact. Provided Larry Brunkenheim brought this kind of business to the hotel, and Intrax bookmarked the Phoenix Heights as one of its favorite leisure destinations, Tom doubted if Hines would object to Larry calling him Mindy Fuckhorn. "These chefs look quite young," said Tom. "That's true," said Hines, eyeing him with a look which said, "Hey, you're not nearly as important as the boss guy here. Just enjoy the tour and spare me the observations." He went on. "They're fresh from college, the finest in the field. I'm very excited about the new talent we're fostering here." Tom laughed to himself, seeing how Larry was being taken by it all. These kids probably weren't fresh out of college at all. They were more likely to be teens who were doing their best and being paid a pittance. Hines introduced his head chef, a stocky 5-footer named Chuck Whalen. Tom couldn't help but notice that the skin around Whalen's eyes appeared 20 years older than the rest of him. Must be the late hours, he thought. Hands were shaken and bullshit exchanged. Even Larry, a big fan of food, couldn't take another 5 minutes of chat about the fine details of their food. "Excellent," he barked. "Where to next, Clayton?" The door had been wrenched off its hinges and was resting limply on the frame. Jack Flanahan stood looking at the farmhouse's side entrance as if trying to see through an illusion. This was real, he finally decided. Furthermore, it would have required some serious force. This he knew, having built the door himself after the storm. Frowning, Flanahan listened hard, trying to detect noises or movement inside the house. He could discern nothing. His home was as quiet as a crypt. All he could hear was the occasional snort from the pigs. Part of him wanted to go back along the driveway to the truck, climb in and burn rubber to the sheriff's office. But he didn't. After a moment's hesitation, he realized that he was done with life and didn't much care what happened once he walked through the door. He had been planning to shoot Dolores and whomever her weasel of a lover happened to be, followed closely by himself. In the event of anything happening to the couple, the farmhouse would be jointly split between his sons Aiden and Patrick, so they would be fine. That was all that mattered to Flanahan. Tears threatened to well up in his eyes, but he stubbornly bit his lip until it passed. What had his father said? "A tear in a Flanahan eye is a mark of shame." Amazing how things like that stayed with you your whole life. Placing the shotgun upright against the outer wall, he softly grabbed the door on either side and calmly moved it. "Mr. Hines, sir, could I have a moment?" Walt Bluestone was the Phoenix Heights head of security, a barrel-chested 40-something. He exuded intimidation and never knowingly smiled. His short black hair connected with a carefully crafted beard, which looped just under his chin and had been made to look all the more menacing with carefully razored slash lines on either side. A walkie-talkie clung to his waist, as did a more cunningly concealed firearm. Bluestone rarely gave away anything in terms of emotion, but his face was presently taut with concern. Hines had been leading the 2 Intrax men through a wide ground floor corridor lined with mirrored elevators. Tom had yet to use any of them, as he hadn't actually seen his room yet. The bellboy had taken his case up, where it presumably sat by a bed where he could be taking a rest to calm his nerves, had it not been for the slimy manager dragging him along for the big show. He felt put upon, resentful, and not a little frayed at the edges from his experiences with the hairy rednecks earlier. He had wondered what the young woman had been doing amid those boneheads. She was beautiful, pure and simple. If he hadn't been preoccupied with being in imminent physical damage, he might have thought that she was giving him the eye. "No problem," Larry was saying, as Hines excused himself and moved over to talk to Bluestone in hushed tones. Larry and Tom then stood talking casually, both of them trying to overhear the conversation. "Jason Voorhees has supposedly returned to the area," Bluestone told Hines, watching his paymaster clasp one palm over his forehead in exasperation. "According to Sheriff Claymark, 4 people were murdered by the lake this morning, 2 police drivers included." "Great," said Hines, casting a sudden sideways glance at Larry and Tom to ensure they couldn't hear. The 2 men returned their attention to each other in the blink of an eye. They had indeed been listening to every word, but Hines was none the wiser. He addressed Bluestone once again. What measures do you propose to take? I want to hire a few men to help me and Flint and cover the area, just in case this guy, whoever he is, turns up over here. We need at least one man on each side of the hotel. I can get them here within the hour. Hines nodded thoughtfully. Do it, but don't pay them full rates. Do some kind of deal. Bluestone sighed. If you pay peanuts, you get good basic security guards, completed Hines. Now get to it. Murdered guests would be bad for the place's reputation, thought Tom. If Hines could hire a couple of rejected police wannabes, then he wouldn't see the harm in doing so. Bluestone was still hovering. Anything else? Asked Hines impatiently. Yeah, Mr. Hines, what are we going to tell the guests? They shouldn't be going down to the lake right now. Hines shook his head as if it was supremely unimportant. Let them listen to the radio and work it out for themselves. The cops will be all over the area anyway. The main thing is that nothing happens here, understand? Bluestone nodded almost imperceptibly and strode off, his back as straight as ever. Larry and Tom briefly raised eyebrows at each other as Hines returned to join them, acting as though nothing was unusual. Now then, gentlemen, he grinned, you'll like this part. Let me show you the bar. Flanagan's finger rested on the trigger as he stole across his own carpets. This hall cut through the middle of the house, dividing the living area at the front from the bedrooms at the back. As he walked, he glanced into rooms. Maybe, it occurred to him, Dolores really was out and there had been a break-in. As he came to the open plain living area, which was flooded with light, the smell hit him hard. The only thing he could compare it to was Dunwin's slaughterhouse a mile away. When he ferried livestock there to be carved up, he drove away as soon as possible, to avoid taking in that terrible, deathly reek. He never expected to smell it here, yet there it was, catching the back of his throat and making him feel ill. He was fearful. As he peered around the corner, through the doorless doorway, the sight almost made him drop the gun. The room resembled a vision of hell, his own personal version. Not one wall had been spared splashes of blood. Flanagan's jaw slacked as he took in the scene. A banner adorned the far wall proclaiming, "Happy Birthday, Dad." Lying in various contorted positions around the room were Dolores, Aiden, and Patrick. Each of them was missing at least one limb, which with a little effort could be spotted elsewhere on the blood-soaked carpets, like some sick puzzle game. Aiden, his beautiful firstborn Aiden, no longer had a head. It stared at Flanagan from the couch, where it lay on its right cheek. Flanagan stared from one set of wide, lifeless eyes to another. All spoke of the horror this family had endured. But how could this be? His brain struggled to process the information and realized his boys had come home as a surprise. Except their work schedules meant that this was the only date they could make, 2 weeks before the actual event. He could easily imagine Dolores telling them that it was the thought that counted. She always said that. The tears started to flow fast and bitter. He no longer gave a damn what his father had always said about them. He realized for the first time that he had made the classic mistake of becoming his father, viewing everyone with suspicion and inventing one paranoid fantasy after another. Suddenly, the possibility that Dolores had been having an affair seemed meaningless. He didn't give a shit. He could barely blame her, the way he'd been acting. Practicalities gripped him, wrenching his wet, salty face away from the carnage. His family, his beautiful boys and wife. He ran into the room and grabbed the phone, picking it up with one hand and brushing away his tears with the back of his other. He quickly realized that the line was dead. A door slammed behind him. He spun, his breath catching in his throat, to see a masked man crossing the corridor outside the living area, spanning it with one mighty stride. He wore a mask, through which Flanagan couldn't see the eyes, and had to bend in order to fit his head through the doorway. Flanagan felt his feet slide beneath him. He was standing on blood, still slippery. Steadying himself with all his strength, he fumbled with the gun. Was it a man? You could see the thing's ribs, for Christ's sake. Might this be some angel of retribution? The figure remained just inside the room's threshold, watching Flanagan. Its shoulders moved as though driven by industrial pistons. Flanagan noticed for the first time that this satanic vision was carrying his buzzsaw, the very saw which he used to hack down trees around the farm's perimeter, the same saw which had seemingly reduced his own flesh and blood to, well, just that. Flanagan didn't wait for this giant to take further action. He raised the shotgun, pointed it at the thing's chest, and squeezed the trigger. The blast deafened Flanagan, the kick driving him back a pace, despite his familiarity with the weapon. He fell backwards, tripping over a body part, one that he didn't want to think about. Before his head struck the wet carpet, he saw that the figure had taken the blast. His aim had been true. What didn't seem true was the fact that this beast had merely stumbled 2 steps backwards, gripping the sides of the doorframe for support and cracking them. He was striding back into the room. The buzzsaw's hungry whir dominated the room like a wild animal prematurely woken from slumber. Flanagan could only faintly hear the sounds. In his dazed state, he realized that the gun had fallen from his grasp. His hands squirmed as they desperately searched the carpet on either side of him, finding only dead meat. Flanagan looked up to see the figure standing directly over him. The spinning saw blade lowered, carving effortlessly through his face, bisecting it from top to bottom, reducing his head to 2 spurting halves. Chunks of brain and bone flew up to strike Jason. One blob of cartilage hit the chin of his mask and clung there. Jason deactivated the saw and stood in the sea of death as the blade whistled to a halt. For a minute it looked as though he was surveying his own personal kingdom, slowly turning his head to take it all in. If Jason was pleased with his handiwork, there was no sign. He strode back out through the doorway, taking the buzzsaw with him. Chapter 7.
What the hell is it now?
Duke rolled down his left window. The cop who stood outside was doing his best to appear authoritative and sure of himself, but he had rookie written all over him. His mirror shades were far too big for his face, and even Halo knew that a pair of frightened eyes was hiding behind them. The Camaro was on a dirt track, no more than a mile from the lake. The cop had come from that direction and flagged them down. Then he had appropriated his best macho stride as he approached the car.
How can we help you, sir?
Asked Duke, who had a knack of appearing like a big, benign angel when forces of law and order were nearby. You haven't done anything wrong, said the cop. I want to make that clear from the start. We just have to warn people against going down to the lake right now. Why's that, officer? Shona, floating her eyelashes from the seat behind Duke, said. Well, we're not issuing full official details as yet, but there seems to be a dangerous criminal on the loose in the area. There was an incident this morning. Duke and Shona stared at the cop through their respective windows, waiting for details. 4 homicides, said the cop. He said the word homicides as though this was the first time he had got to say the word in an official capacity. Halo could tell that it excited and scared him at the same time. 4 homicides down at the lake, he repeated, warming to the sound of himself talking death. So you'd be well advised not to head down there. If that's where you were going, I wouldn't go there. The lake is all cordoned off.
Oh no, officer, said Duke. We're just passing through. But thanks for giving us the heads up.
No problem. You kids be safe now. Thanks, officer, said Shona. Have a nice day. The cop smiled at her, nodded, and headed back to his own vehicle. Duke and Shona rode their windows back up. Shoot, said Halo. So where do we go now?
Where do you think? Said Duke. Down to the lake.
His statement triggered an immediate division between the sexes. Trey and Basket nodded as if the idea made perfect sense, while Halo and Shona looked horrified. Come on, guys, Trey said to the ladies behind him. It'll be fun. Let's live on the frickin' edge. You've got to be kidding me, said Shona. Please tell me you're kidding. She looked to Basket for support, but he was simply shrugging.
You heard what Deputy Fucknut said, laughed Duke. The lake is crawling with cops. What self-respecting killer's going to hang around there? We'll be in the safest place. We won't go all the way down to the lake. We'll camp in the woods.
No way, said Halo. Absolutely no way. Let's turn around and go back. At this, Trey flipped. Oh my God, woman. Are you intent on making sure I have no fun on this earth whatsoever? You'll stay with us, goddammit. Drive on, dude. Duke urged the Camaro onwards. Halo and Shona fell silent, exchanging horrified glances.
We're gonna get murdered, roared Duke. We're all gonna die.
Hell yeah, Trey and Basket howled together. The Camaro picked up speed. Officer Zeke Hollis wished he had a patrol partner. He'd been given the task of driving around the area, warning locals to be on their guard. This was the first time he had been given something important to do. But he also felt vulnerable, driving around on his own even though it was still daylight. The killer had dispatched a couple of police divers after all, along with those young campers. Every few minutes, Hollis's right hand would almost involuntarily head down to his belt holster to check that his gun was still in place. For the rest of the day, that Beretta would be his surrogate partner. Worst of all, these darn shades kept slipping down over his nose. As he drove, Hollis mentally ticked off the community members from whom he had already visited. Who's next? He really ought to stop off at the Flanaghan's farm and inform the couple what had happened. His radio buzzed static, and he spoke at it. "Hollis here." The voice was Sheriff Clay Marks. "We found another body's ache in the woods. Had his goddamn head removed. The bastard's still in the area. Be ever vigilant." Hollis's flesh pricked with fear. This was no kid stuff. That was for damn sure. "Will do, Sheriff," he said with bravado he didn't feel. "On my way to the Flanaghan's place now. Check in with you later." He took a left, heading down toward the lake, then a right, nervously scanning the trees for movement as he did so. The road would take him straight to the farm. He hesitated. Would Jack be home? It would make all the difference between Hollis either acting like a regular police officer, all politeness and benign authority, or simply taking the opportunity to screw Mrs. Flanaghan on the living room floor. Their affair had been going on for months. It had started one evening when her husband was over at Dunwin's slaughterhouse, and she was all alone. One thing led to another, which led to a whole series of wildly passionate rolls in the hay. So, should he drop by the farm? As usual, it was worth taking the risk. He thought as he drove off along the road, that woman's pussy was to die for. "Chloe, my dear, get these gentlemen whatever they'd like to drink." Clayton Hines smiled over at Larry. "With our compliments, naturally." Tom and his boss were perched on stools at the bar of a stylish cocktail lounge. It was pleasingly old-fashioned, like something from a 40s movie, Tom thought. Looked like it should be in black and white. He had really started to tire of Hines's excessive hospitality. Since the kitchens, they had been shown everything from the servants' quarters to the suites to the roof, where the view was admittedly spectacular, stretching out across the whole of Crystal Lake. From that vantage point, they had seen the distant waters and spotted vehicles gathered on its banks. Something was going on down there, no doubt connected to what he and Larry had half overheard of Hines's conversation with that security guard. At the moment, though, all that mattered was the prospect of free drinks. Tom could be as shallow as the best of them, when he set his mind to it. Besides, alcohol was just what he needed to calm his nerves. He opted for a simple beer, while Larry predictably chose a far more corporate scotch on the rocks. As Chloe fetched them and Larry fielded yet more of Hines's slimy chatter, Tom glanced around the lounge. Most of the tables and plush couches were occupied, even at this time. Just after 5 p.m., guests ranged from the archetypal holiday makers, old people in shorts and sneakers, to suited business types. One woman, he noticed, was sitting alone in the bar's far corner. She was in her 30s, but a looker. Strangely, even though she was obviously attacking a cocktail with some gusto, she was dressed in the Phoenix's staff uniform. Perhaps her shift had finished. There was no celebration in her body language, however. She appeared irritated as her eyes flashed around the bar. Tom soon realized that she was focusing most of her attention on Hines, staring darkly at the manager. Her eyes suddenly locked with his. She smiled faintly and gave him a subtle beckon with a slight jerk of her head. Tom turned away awkwardly just in time to see April entering the bar. "Hey," she said, crossing to join them and pulling herself up on a stool. "What are we having?" Tom took a swig of beer. "An extra-large dose of kiss-ass," he murmured, ensuring that neither Hines nor Larry could hear him. "I haven't even seen my room yet." Her hand brushed his knee. "Well, you can show me later, big boy." She frowned and looked over at Hines. "Who's that?" "The manager of this place, Hines something, or Clayton something, I don't remember which." April said nothing, but Tom saw her eyeing Hines with renewed interest. She was so obviously drawn to anyone in a position of power. He was amazed, come to think of it, that she hadn't already tried to get into Larry's pants. Hell, maybe she had and been turned down. Maybe Tom was the next best thing. He had to face facts. His secret girlfriend was a power fucker. It was only a matter of time before she moved on to someone further up the ladder. The question was, who would drop whom first? "Seen Greg?" he asked her. "Nope. Who cares? I do hope you're not going to let him socialize with us tonight." Tom sighed. "Greg and I have been friends a while, April. I don't know what the hell's got into the guy." "I do, and so do you. He's jealous. The little brat's jealous of both of us." Tom wished he could take issue with that. Instead, he drained his bottle. The corridor was tastefully lit, all dark reds and patches of shadow. Greg stalked along it like a cat. He had only just realized that this was the 13th floor of the hotel. As far as he had been aware, American hotels didn't have such a floor, in order to pander to people with dumb superstitions. Perhaps this was a mistake, just like the mistake Tom and his prissy little bitch had made, overtaking him on the corporate highway. Downstairs at the check-in desk, he had overheard the receptionist tell Larry Bruckenheim which room he was in, 1301, the big suite. In Greg's hand was an envelope, stamped with the hotel's Phoenix logo. Inside was a folded sheet of the place's headed notepaper. He had written a brief note to Larry, anonymously telling him about Tom and April, plus the fact that Tom had been scouting around for a position with Intrax's bitter publishing rivals, Mainline Incorporated. The latter wasn't true at all, but this meant little to Greg. He just wanted to see Tom torn down from his high horse. He bent down and slid the envelope under the door. The farmhouse came into view as Hollis's police car jutted along the dirt road. Behind it, the sun had begun its decline, superimposed on a gray sky. Hollis froze as he sensed movement much closer to the vehicle. His foot stomped the brake and the car ground to a halt. He focused on the trees to the left of the track, positive that he had seen someone on foot, someone big, veer off the road and into the woods. It had been a blur, but he had definitely seen it. Peering out of the window into the green depths, he could see nothing but trees. There were no paths here, just a tangled maze of boughs and trunks. Hollis swallowed hard, but his throat remained as dry as sandpaper. Was he really cut out for this job? He looked at the spot where he had seen the figure leave the track. Then he looked straight ahead at the farmhouse. He had to make a decision. Either drive on and sit in the warm for a while, eating apple pie and maybe enjoy a roll in the hay with Dolores, or go bag himself a killer in the woods. His trembling hand rested on the Beretta. He remembered how good he had felt when he joined the local force, how it had made him feel. For the first time in his life, he was going to mean something. He would no longer be a figure of fun, no longer Zeke the Freak. He shuddered at the recollection, and no longer a coward. He would stand up for the law and save lives, serve and fucking protect. The gun was free of its holster and resting in his hand. He checked that it was loaded. Then he slowly got out of the car, his eyes fixed on those trees. As he locked the door, because it wouldn't do to have his cruiser stolen while he was pursuing a suspect, he took one last look at the farmhouse. The sun had sunk further, framing the building with a vivid halo and casting long shadows across the land. They seemed to reach up along the track as though trying to grab him. He ducked between two trees, where he had seen the figure vanish. Clutching his gun to his chest with both hands, Zeke Hollis entered the woods. As usual, Chester Gray had arisen from his deep sleep precisely whenever the hell he liked. That was the beauty of his new life. The country didn't wake you with a throng of commuter traffic, stressful sales figures, or a list of 101 things to do. He would never forget what the coronary had taught him a year ago, not while there was the scar on his chest to remind him, every time he looked in the mirror. He had learned not to sweat the small stuff or the big stuff. Scurrying around like a rat all your life was no kind of life. Shame it had taken him 58 years to learn this. 58 years of running his own publishing house, calling the shots, accruing a personal fortune, banging high-class prostitutes. He would give anything to turn back time in order to regain his health. Emergency surgery might have stopped him from dying, but it had slowed him right down. Made his raging Marlboro addiction unattainable, too. His life was pleasant enough these days. Relaxing was practically mandatory for him, under doctor's orders. But he wished he'd exercised a little more moderation back in the day. Taken a few more vacations. If he'd done that, maybe he'd have less money, but neither might he have suffered that damn coronary. He'd still be smoking the odd cigarette and scoring the odd publishing victory instead of his son, Dean, running the business, leaving him in a sort of godfatherly position. When he had the chance, however, Chester Gray still banged hookers. Shame he couldn't keep it up for nearly as long as he used to. Still, a guy of his age needed hobbies. Gray briefly washed in the bathroom, which he had himself installed in the back of his log cabin, then used a straight razor to shave. Dean had protested when Gray announced he would be handling some of the cabin's renovation work himself, but he didn't want to become an invalid. It wasn't like he was lifting logs, for Christ's sake, just a little basic DIY. He dragged the razor's blade over his skin with quick, careless strokes. He didn't plan on meeting anyone today, so there was no need to go over the top. Then he pulled on his fishing clothes, slapped the green hat on his head, and selected a rod from a whole bunch, which rested against the kitchen wall. The shotgun stayed put in the cupboard. He had no stomach for hunting at the best of times, unless the creature was water-based, with fins. The weapon was purely for self-preservation. He paused to grab a dog-eared crime novel from the bookshelf and shoved it into a deep pocket on the outside of his jacket. He pictured the day ahead. No phone calls, no faxes, no irate book distributors or editors or authors adding to his stress levels and banging nails deeper into his coffin. Then he opened his front door and came face to face with death incarnate. Jason operated the saw as soon as the cabin's door swung open. An angry buzz erupted as he jammed the vicious, blurred blade toward Gray, who instinctively presented his fishing rod. Slicing easily through the wood, the buzzsaw proceeded through Gray's jacket and into his chest. Gray's face was rigid with shock, as though the pain hadn't registered. He opened his mouth, and the faintest of hisses sounded at the back of his throat. As Gray slumped to his knees, Jason stooped with him, ensuring that the blade remained wedged in place. Over the giant's shoulder, Gray saw a young cop standing maybe 10 or 12 feet away. The boy looked terrified. Gray's last thought was how sorry he felt for him. Every part of Zeke Hollis's body was telling him to turn and run. This guy was huge, almost 7 foot tall, and he was holding some kind of fucking saw. This felt like the movies, not the easy country beat that he'd signed up for. He could tell that the kneeling fisherman was dead. Blood dribbling from a slack mouth was always a clear sign. The victim's eyes were staring at Hollis, swamping him with guilt. Why didn't he stop this murder from happening? He had looked into the clearing and watched this hulking creature, ribs glistening through its back as it closed in on the log cabin. He could have yelled at it, drawn its attention, but no. A civilian was dead because of his dithering fear. The giant was facing him, chest heaving, one livid eye visible through its mask hole. This was one angry motherfucker. The fisherman fell sideways, taking the saw with him, clutching its handles. The killer seemed unconcerned by this. Maybe, thought Hollis, he was bored with the device. Or maybe he was about to give himself up? Hollis knew he had to be braver than ever before. Much, much braver. He assumed the gun-toting stance, mentally screaming at his legs to stop wobbling. Then he raised the gun, leveling it at the psycho's heart. At least where he assumed there was supposed to be a heart. If this guy was still walking with half of his skin missing, then it did make you wonder about the rest of him. "Stop right there, man," he said, surprised by how firm his voice sounded. "Get down on the ground now." Jason obeyed neither command. He took one lumbering pace toward Hollis, then another. He was very much upright. "Stop right there. I don't want to kill anybody, but you keep moving and I swear I'll shoot." Hollis knew damn well that phrases like, "I don't want to kill anybody" and "I swear" weren't helping his case as a convincing cop. Neither were they helping him save his own life. Jason walked on. "Fucking stop!" screamed Hollis. He squeezed the trigger. Nothing happened. Something had jammed inside the weapon. Jason was almost upon it. Hollis tried to think of what he'd learned about gun jamming. What did you have to do in order to make it work? He had no clue. Hadn't been paying attention. So he hurled the useless lump of metal straight at the maniac's mask. He had always been a decent shot when it came to throwing, and the gun hit its mark. It bounced off into some bushes, leaving not so much as a dent. As the psycho rounded on him, Hollis saw fresh blood on the mask. For a second, he was mesmerized by it. Then he turned to run for his life. It was too late. Jason gained an iron grip on Hollis's shirt collar with one huge hand and raised the other above the cop's head in a tightly balled fist. The fist came down like a pile driver, slamming into the top of Zeke Hollis's skull. The impact shattered his spine and collapsed his neck, forcing the head down into his torso. Jason stood back to view his handiwork as Hollis briefly convulsed, then tumbled to one side. He suffered one last flashback to the schoolyard. All the kids standing around him, fingers pointing, their faces contorted with juvenile loathing as they yelled, "Zeke the freak! Zeke the freak!" If they could only see him now. "Can you drive?" asked Shona, perching herself on the log beside Halo. She was forced to repeat the question as Metallica's latest album was blaring out of an old ghetto blaster which sat nearby. "Yeah? You want to escape?" Shona nodded, more than half serious. She looked edgy. As she spoke, she was surveying the undergrowth, which surrounded their demolition zone of a campsite. "We couldn't do that," said Halo. "For one thing, they'd kill us. For another, we can't leave them out here without wheels." All around the women, the others were acting as they always did, like monkeys. For the last half hour, testosterone had flooded the clearing, as tents were shoddily erected and beers were shotgunned. This grim process involved bashing a hole in the base of a can and holding it to your mouth, in order to catch the full force of the intoxicating liquor within. Halo had watched Trey as the paper-thin line between Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde grew ever more redundant. Having lit a fire in an old oil can that had been resting dormant at one side of the clearing, the men were taking it in turns to leap over the thing. Halo and Shauna sat there wincing as they attempted ever more elaborate stunts. Sooner or later, someone was going to get hurt. It always happened on each of the camping trips they had ventured out on. Someone got burnt or cut or broken. They would then spend the rest of the month wearing their scars as badges of honor. Halo looked glumly around the site. It was no more than about 30 feet square and increasingly dark around the edges. What she could see of the sky was shot through with blazing orange streaks as the sun breathed its last. Soon the fire in the canister would be their only light source, besides a few torches. Halo couldn't believe that she had allowed herself to be brought here, even after what the cop had told them. This would be the last time, she thought. Hopefully not literally. "Hey, at least you can drink," offered Shona, as if reading Halo's bleak thoughts. "I had to go and get myself a bun in the oven just when alcohol was needed." Halo smiled thinly. For a moment, she considered telling Shona that she was pregnant as well. But she couldn't trust Shona not to tell everyone else. She had known the girl for a while, and they were fairly tight, but Shona was impulsive, and often not the sharpest knife in the drawer. Right then, with the music pumping, it might be hard to impress upon Shona that Halo didn't want anyone else to know about the baby. So when would she tell Trey? As she watched him dance around the fire, shirtless, spitting beer at his friends, the only sane answer had to be never. His insistence that they press on with this journey, despite the fact that a homicidal nutbag might be on the prowl, had finally made something snap in Halo's head. It was, she realized, the part of her brain which had continually made excuses for him. Because that's what she did every time. When he was violent toward her, she would remind herself that he came from a broken home and had a lot of pent-up aggression. Not his fault that he couldn't control it, surely. When he refused to seek therapy for his problem, she rationalized this as having been because today's males found it hard to admit to problems. "Oh, girl, you're chock full of excuses and justifications," she thought, gazing into the fire. "You should be running the country." "So, why ain't you knocking back a beer?" asked Shona, snapping her head back to reality. Once again, Halo seized on a good excuse. This time it was almost true. "Because I'm scared too," she said. "I want to stay alert." Shona rolled her eyes. "Great vacation, huh?" "Oh, the best." The two of them almost managed to laugh just as the music stopped. "Hey, where's Duke?" Basket asked, looking around the site. He and Trey had been so busy clowning around, they hadn't seen the big guy leave. Halo felt her body tense. Hairs prickled on the back of her neck. "Did you guys see him leave?" frowned Trey, looking at the women. They shook their heads. There was a loud clunk that made Halo jump from the log. Basket laughed. "It was the tape, Halo, turning itself off." "He'll be back," Trey shrugged. "Turn the tape over, man." Basket crossed the clearing to the ghetto blaster that lay on the ground, mere feet away from a clump of bushes. He bent down to find the eject button. The bushes split down the middle with a huge rustle, and a big, shadowy figure launched itself at Basket. Halo and Shauna screamed, clutching at each other. Basket roared with fright as the intruder grabbed his waist from behind and hoisted him into the air. Trey ran to help, then slowed to a halt. He started laughing raucously. "Fuck, man, you got us good, I'll admit it." Duke was smiling as he let go of his brother, sending him tumbling down on the ground, all scowls and scuffed pride. "Where's Duke? Where's Duke?" he said mockingly. "I went to drain the vein, dummies. Better get used to that. It's going to happen a lot tonight." As Basket flipped the cassette tape over, Duke grabbed a beer and walked over to the log where Halo and Shauna sat. They grudgingly shifted along the length of it, allowing him to sit as their heart rates returned to something approaching normal. "Did I scare you little ladies?" he asked, wringing his hands together in the fire's heat. "Oh, no," said Shauna. "Not at all." He laughed.
"Yeah, right."
There was a pause as he looked around the campsite, tugging his ring pull-off in one continuous yank.
"Of course," he said. "As usual, I'm the only guy without a chick. Now you're girls, right?"
Cautious nods.
"Why do you think I don't have a chick?"
They looked at him for a while, not knowing what to say.
"If you had a chick," said Basket, "she'd be a chick with a dick. Get it, Trey? A chick with a dick."
He and Trey slapped palms, chuckling. Duke glared at them, then continued his interrogation of the women.
"Am I pig ugly? Is that it?"
"Yes," crackled Basket, reaching for the play button.
"That's definitely it." "Fuck you. Shut the hell up. At least people can tell who I'm talking to."
Basket scowled and activated the tape. Music blared from the ghetto blaster once again.
"Am I ugly?"
repeated Duke, louder. The women shook their heads. In truth, he really wasn't ugly. If he'd come packaged with an entirely different personality and voice, either of them might have looked twice. "You're just an asshole," said Shona, "and you know it."
"True,"
he said, taking the insult surprisingly well. He always seemed to have a soft spot for Shona. She could say things to him that no one else dared voice. Another pause as he took a slurp from the beer can and rocked back and forth to the music, making the log jerk with him.
"Hey, Halo, is there anyone you could set me up with? What happened to your sister? She was hot."
At this, Halo had to think a little. What had happened to her big sister? "We fell out last year, when she kicked me out," she said. "We don't speak anymore. She still works round here. I heard she's down yonder at the big hotel that opened up."
"Right on," said Duke,
taking another slug from the can. Then he frowned.
"What was her name again? Sheila? Sharon?"
Halo smiled. "Shelley," she said. By the fifth drink, Shelley was beginning to feel fine and dandy. The figures in the room had become less distinct. She was no longer having to hold that uptight, prim and proper stance, but she could barely remember why she had been so pissed off. Ah, yes, Clayton Hines, her bastard boss, lover, and tormentor. He had left the lounge a while back, no doubt to go find his next piece of coos. The cute young guy was still sitting at the bar, but his girlfriend seemed to be sitting next to him. Her mind settled on Halo for a minute. She still thought of her as a daughter, and why not? She had doubled as both of the girls' parents for all those years after their own mother died. Dad had already flown the coop at that point, so Shelley raised the girl all by herself with help from a succession of boyfriends. So maybe there had been some lurking resentment on Shelley's part, that she had spent so much time looking after Halo's best interests when she could have been living her own life. The resentment finally exploded, as was inevitable, and out Halo went. She would patch things up with Halo one day soon. They may have stood outside Shelley's trailer in the rain that night, exchanging insults as she hurled Halo's suitcase onto the ground. But deep down they were still sisters. That thought was a strong source of comfort to her. The fact that there was one person in this world who she would always be close to, even if they outwardly hated each other at this point in time. They would make up and everything would be fine. Shelley had to admit that throwing Halo out had been a good move, purely from her own point of view. On the most obvious level, she had had a hell of a lot more room in her trailer. She didn't have to worry so much about her kid sister seeing her bringing men home, and she didn't have to spend time looking after Halo. The girl was beautiful, and she loved her dearly. But at the age of 18, she needed a wake-up call. Get out there in the big wide world, or at least a different trailer park, and gain a little independence. It was just a shame that Halo had apparently moved in with that shady-looking character Trey. It was also a shame that she and Halo hadn't spoken since the bust-up. But there were always downsides to every decision you made in life, such as bumping uglies with your boss. She downed the rest of the cocktail. Ah, the hell with it, she thought. Just as she was about to stand up and head to the bar for a refill, a man slid smoothly down into one of the chairs at her table. "You mind if I join you?" he said. Shelley sat back and gave him the once-over. He was older, even older than Clayton, in fact, but a handsome, suave devil. His suit was immaculate, and his eyes sparkled kindly as he peered across the table at her empty glass. "Can I get you another?" "Maybe," she said. "I'm Shelley. And you are?" His smile dazzled her, displaying rows of perfectly kept, whiter-than-white teeth. Norwood, he said. Norwood Thawn, at your service. Okay, this has been chapters 6 and 7 of Friday the 13th, Hate, Kill, Repeat. I hope you guys are enjoying this book. I'm liking it a hell of a lot more than Hell Lake. I enjoy the story. I'm curious to see where it goes. Every set of characters I'm intrigued with, and I'm behind getting to see what happens with them, where they go, how they grow. Hell Lake, all I remember from that book is Jason shooting a gun, wearing a welder's mask, and him getting shot in the butt. And then Church of the Divine Psychopath I thought was a pretty good book, and this one I think is as good, if not better, than Divine Psychopath. But my opinion's my opinion. I want to hear you guys' opinion. Drop me comments down below. Let me know what you think of the book, the narration. If you just want to say hello, whatever, I'd love to hear from you guys. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe. Click that like button. Let me know I'm doing a good job for you. Click the bell so you always know when new chapters are dropping. Spread the word out there, guys. Let more people know. I'm not monetizing this channel. I'm not going to make money off of ad revenue. I'm doing this as a labor of love for super fans like me and like you all. Super horror slasher fans. So everybody can experience these books with us and enjoy them like we are. Alright guys, I'll be back tomorrow with some Jason X Planet of the Beast. And then the day after that, more Hate, Kill, Repeat. So until next time, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying, thanks for listening, and don't click that thumbs down button, because
it's got a death curse!